stand. Spirit of Jesus, open our hearts to live and to love the gospel of the Lord.
Heart to Heart, a Catholic media ministry, presents an inspiring gospel reflection by Father Michael Sparrow. Father Michael is a Jesuit priest working as a writer and retreat master at the Bellarmine Jesuit Retreat House outside Chicago.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. As Jesus continued his journey to Jerusalem, he traveled through Samaria and Galilee. As he was entering a village, 10 lepers met him. They stood at a distance from him and raised their voice, saying, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, Jesus said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." And they were going, as they were going, they were cleansed. And one of them, realizing that he had been healed, returned, glorifying God in a loud voice, and he fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. This man was a Samaritan. Jesus said in reply, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give thanks except this foreigner?" Then he said to the man, "Stand up and go. Your faith has saved you." The Gospel of the Lord. I suspect our Gospel today is a familiar one to many of us. And in this month of November, the month of Thanksgiving, it's an appropriate Gospel for us to reflect on the many blessings that God has given within our own life. Let's take a deeper look at this story from Luke's Gospel. It begins by Luke recounting that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. The journey to Jerusalem is always a journey to suffering, to death, and to resurrection. It's Jesus facing what the Father has asked him to do, which is to be faithful in love. As Jesus is on his way to fulfill his destiny, he is traveling through the borders between Galilee and Samaria. You'll recall that the Holy Land at that time was divided into 3 sections: the northern part, which is Galilee, a middle western section, which is Samaria, and then the southern section of Judah. The Samaritans were considered heretics by the Jews, and there wasn't any travel between the two. They would be rendered unclean with associating with these heretic people. But notice that at least one of the Samaritans in this area that they encounter, one of the lepers that they encounter in this area is a Samaritan. We might just pause for a second and to say, in the midst of suffering, so many of the social norms break down. Misery brings people together. Because if you were afflicted with the disease of leprosy, you couldn't interact with everyday folks. The people would be rendered unclean if they had contact with a Samaritan. The disease, the sources of the disease were unknown, and part of that is simply a health prescription. We think of some of the epidemics within our own time, and when those are undiagnosed or they don't know how to be treated, we think of several of those epidemics within our own time. The norm is always one of fear and to keep those people at a distance. So it was in Jesus' time, and that was written into law, of the lepers had to remain at a distance. But they're joined together, Jew and Samaritan alike, in their common suffering. It's not unlike the animal kingdom. If you recall in the story, the Disney story, The Lion King, when there's a drought, animals that are natural enemies come together at the watering hole. And in normal circumstances, they would be at each other's throats, but because of the drought, they come together to find water. So it is for us humans in the midst of our suffering. Many of those norms that keep us apart can actually unite us in the suffering. And that's the case of these 10 lepers coming to Jesus, and at a distance, keeping the law, they shout out to Jesus, "Have mercy on us." Jesus' reaction to them is immediate. "Go show yourselves to the priest." And in the midst of that journey, they realize they are healed. Again, Jewish law would prescribe that a person who was afflicted with leprosy couldn't enter the temple, so it would be natural that the person who would be able to say, "Yes, you are healed, no, you're not healed," would be the priest, because they're in charge of the temple worship. And in the midst of that journey, one of them, all 10 of them eventually realize they're healed, but one returns, that famous one returns to give thanks. Realizing he was healed, opening his eyes to the reality of what God had done for him. I think part of the importance of gratitude begins with simply our eyes being opened to be able to see the truth of our lives. When we focus too much on our problems, our eyes are closed, they're preoccupied with all of the struggles and the difficulties of what's going on. We give far too much weight to the problems that weigh us down. But when our eyes are opened in gratitude, we see, even in the midst of the most difficult circumstances, how God is blessing us, anointing us, loving us. I've said often that one of the great tools that St. Ignatius Loyola recommended that we use every day is a daily examen, is to look over our lives. And that daily examen begins in gratitude. Begin of looking at our lives and seeing how God is blessing us even in the midst of difficult circumstances. Or, as I sometimes teasingly like to say, there's no day that's so bad that it can't get worse. And so look deeply into our lives and see the blessings that God is bestowing. Don't we take so many of our blessings for granted? We take our health for granted until we get sick. And then we think, oh, if I could only healthy again, then all my problems would dissolve. And then when we get healthy again, we forget about what it was like to be sick, and we just get about our normal business. Or we've got a few dollars in the bank, and we're preoccupied with trying to get everything done, and then we fall on financially hard times, and we remember, oh, when we had that money and we could pay our bills, how good were things? And then things even out, and then we go about being preoccupied. There's always going to be problems in our life. There's never going to be a time in our life where we can say, okay, all of my problems are met. It's just easy street for me. There's always going to be a difficulty. And if we have to wait for all of our problems to be solved before we say thanks, then we're never going to say thanks. But in the midst of every day, if we look and we say, how is the Lord blessing me right now? There's always going to be something that we can find to give thanks for. My friend, Father Jim Willig, who died of cancer in the year 2001, actually was able to do, he had an extraordinary gift of time travel. And he went back in time and he was able to interview those 10 lepers. And he just asked the 9 who didn't give thanks why they didn't come back to give thanks. And this is what they told him. Number 1, Well, to tell you the truth, I was so excited to tell everybody else, I forgot to return to Jesus to say thank you. Leper number 2. No sooner was I cured from leprosy than my arthritis flared up. Let me tell you, it's one thing after another. I don't want to complain, but I still have an awful lot of pain. Leper number 3. He knows how much I appreciate what he did. I don't need to tell him. Besides, I'm sure he hears it from a lot of other people. Leper number 4. Frankly, after all I've been through, I felt I deserved it. Don't you? Leper number 5. Hey, he told us to go see the priests. I'm just doing what he told me. Leper number 6. I don't know. I take it for granted that he was just doing his job. Leper 7. I thought about saying something to him, but to be honest with you, I didn't want to give him a big head. Leper number 8. To thank him or not to thank him, that is the question. I haven't decided yet. And leper number 9. Hey, I just went along with most of what the others were doing. Why are you asking me? Ask them. There's always an excuse, isn't there? But when we look deeply into our lives, we can always find something to be grateful for. The hunger that is in our world, said Mother Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, is not just a physical hunger. It's a deep spiritual ache. And when we realize how much God has blessed us, is blessing us, and will continue to bless us, then we not only lift up a prayer of thanks, we reach out to others in need. Saint Mother Teresa once said, the greatest disease in the West today is not leprosy or TB. It's being unwanted, unloved, uncared for. We can cure physical diseases with medicine, but the only cure for loneliness, despair, and hopelessness is love. There's so many in the world who are dying for a piece of bread, but there are many more who are dying for a little love. The poverty in the West is a different kind of poverty than what I know in India. It's not only a poverty of loneliness, it's a poverty of spirituality. There's a hunger for love. There's a hunger for God. We're here today because God has touched our lives. Let's reach into that place of gratitude and share that love and that life and that grace with those in greater need. Let me just conclude by sharing one of my favorite songs of gratitude. It was made famous in the musical Godspell. It's actually based on an Episcopalian hymn number 138, We Plow the Fields. The lyrics were originally from a German poet written by Matthias Claudius, and it was translated into English by Jane Montgomery Campbell. We plow the fields and scatter the good seed on the land, but it is fed and watered by God's almighty hand. He sends us snow in winter, the warmth to swell the grain, the breezes and the sunshine and soft, refreshing rain. All good gifts around us are sent from heaven above. So thank the Lord. Oh, thank the Lord for all his love. We thank thee then, O Father, for all things bright and good, the seed time and the harvest, our life, our health, our food. No gifts have we to offer for all thy love imparts, but that which thou desirest, our humble, thankful hearts. All good gifts around us are sent from heaven above. Oh, thank the Lord. Oh, thank the Lord for all his love. Amen. Amen.
heart to heart, hand in hand, praying for grace to understand. Spirit of Jesus, open